Last time I talked about part of my cosplay journey, specifically the first fully crafted pieces. I told you that those were supposed to introduce my first fully crafted fit, Wanderer, from Genshin Impact, also known as Scaramouche. I always wanted to jump into the world of cosplayers who made their entire outfit themselves. It's not like you can put together an outfit like this, with your usual clothes. I wanted to go with a character that would look interesting enough, without becoming too difficult or overwhelming. Many games have very detailed and interesting character designs, but you'll sit there for hours trying to figure out what they're actually wearing. In the end, I decided on Genshin, since some of their characters are comprehensible enough. So for Wanderer, I started by taking a good look at his outfit. I used Games Fashion Archive to take a closer look at every individual piece. Then I sketched the pieces and added little notes on how I'd actually recreate them. And then, I trashed all of my sketches and just jumped into it anyway. I spread out some white fabric on the floor, laid on top of it, and marked some specific points around me. Specifically my shoulders, torso, armpits. I sketched a shape similar to this. These short flaps at the top will be folded over to create his short sleeves. I made things kind of difficult for myself since I wanted to make this part out of one piece of fabric instead of stitching smaller parts together. I didn't want any visible stitches. The easiest option would have been a shape like this, and then folding down the upper half to create the front part. But my fabric wasn't long enough, so I used my geometry skills to make it work anyway. Once I had a complicated and confusing piece cut out, I stitched it all together and tried it on, only to realize the shoulders are terribly tight. Once again, now you can tell I'm truly a beginner. The rest of this thing was good enough and I really didn't want to make a new one, so I just cut the shoulder parts open in the back, grabbed small pieces of fabric in an odd banana shape and inserted them there. Professionals might be screaming behind their screen right now, but for me, this actually worked. Since this part builds a lot of creases anyway, you can't really see the seams when I'm wearing it. This time I was able to raise my arms while wearing it, so I'll call it good enough and move on to the next step. I sketched a pattern of his arm parts and painted them on with a mix of acrylic paint and fabric softener. The next piece I wanted to work on was his capelet. I decided to order 2 new fabrics for it instead of painting the whole piece in paint, since paint stiffens the fabric a lot, while this piece was supposed to be very flowy. I had to wait 2 months for the fabrics to arrive, so I took this time as an excuse to procrastinate, instead of working on other parts in the meantime. Once the fabrics arrived, I first created a mock-up with random fabric to make sure I got the right shape and size down. Then I traced that mock-up onto the real fabrics and stitched them all together. By the way, the mock-up is sandwiched between those, so that didn't go to waste. It gives it some weight and stability. I did the same thing with all of the other parts, just that I used thicker fabric for the other parts to give them even more shape. After seeing nothing but blue for a few days, I finished all the pieces and ironed them into their proper shapes before starting to paint all the patterns onto them. At the same time, I worked on the hat, which is made of cardboard and paper mache, so my desk was a terrible mess at these times. The hat only needed to be put together, covered in paper mache and paint, and I needed to find a way to make it stay on my head. At first I tried magnets, but my magnets were not strong enough. Then I tried to just put it on my head as it is, but this part is too thin, and it didn't have a lot of room for my head, so it just didn't stay on, you know? So after a lot of contemplation and desperation, I just put a headband in there, you see? It holds, so if it does its job, I can move on. At the same time, I also crafted all the other solid pieces of the cosplay, out of cardboard and newspaper. Whenever I needed something to hang from something else, I shoved a piece of wire into the pieces and glued those into place. After sewing all of the blue parts and crafting all of the solid parts, the only things left were his sleeve gloves and his shoes. For the gloves, I used the fabric of some fingerless gloves I had, like those. I cut them up like this, and then I used black leather to make the outer part. Here's a rough sketch of the pieces of leather I used. It was very complicated. After stitching those together, I noticed that leather doesn't stretch. So after failing to put a zipper into it, I just used press-on buttons instead. For the leg parts, I first made the white fabric part, which was fairly simple. I just held a square of fabric around my leg, marked how far I wanted it to go, and stitched that together. After finding some black stocking in my closet, I tried it on, marked on myself where I wanted to cut it, took it off and cut at the markings. I initially planned to hem all of the cut borders, but that wasn't necessary as it held up its shape just fine. For the shoes, I luckily had some super old black sandals lying around. I cut everything off, since I only needed the sole. Then I grabbed the purple string I bought for this project, measured on myself how long I needed the pieces to be, and hot glued them on. A friend of mine said as long as you don't dance Rasputin in these, you'll be fine. Update, it was not fine. They broke after walking for like 20 meters. I used the same purple string for all the tassels Mondra has in his outfit. Just cut the length you need and comb out 80% of it. I used thin EVA foam here and there for smaller pieces that needed to be flexible. For the belt, I simply put buttons into a purple piece of fabric and stitched another black piece that goes on top. I made a little bow with some black fabric and added a safety pin to it. In general, this project was some sewing, some painting, and a lot of paper mache. I know everyone always talks about how cosplaying is such an expensive hobby, but it really doesn't have to be. When I tell people that they can cosplay with little budgets too, they often get discouraged, as they think of low quality, flimsy looking results. But with what I showed you today, you can make an entire cosplay with a super low budget. I only spent about 20 bucks on this, which is insane. Of course, this cosplay might break easily, based on the materials I used, but I'm generally very careful with my things, so it'll work for me. If you invest into better materials, that's where the story starts to get expensive. Paper mache basically doesn't cost anything. I already had white fabric and some little pieces in the other colors there, and the blue fabric only cost me about 7 bucks. The string cost me about 3 bucks, and I got the wig secondhand for 10. I already owned black shorts and a sleeveless turtleneck. And that's already all there is to it. If anyone out there actually tries to follow my guidance and has any questions, you can feel free to put them in the comments and I'll try to explain as best I can.